lens. Wouldn't it be so great if there was just one lens that can do everything? Just so great. Unfortunately, there are no one lens to rule them all, so we as filmmakers and photographers need to know how different lenses give different looks so that we can choose the right lens or lenses for our needs. We'll also look at a few things to consider when buying your first lens, but before we do that, we need to understand how they work. First of all, we have something called focal length, and a lens's focal length, often written in millimeters, is not how long the actual lens is, but instead a distance from the camera sensor to a point where light rays converge to form a sharp image. Now that's super confusing and not at all important, so instead you can just remember that if you have a smaller number like 10 or 16, we get a wider angle of view, and if you have a larger number like 100 or more, you get a tighter angle of view. Wide-angle lenses are from around 35mm and down, and lenses from 70mm and up are considered telephoto lenses. All the focal lengths in between that, 35 and 70, depending on who you ask, are considered normal or standard lenses because they're similar to the view we get from our own eyes. Now here's where things get sort of interesting and confusing at the same time. While a wide-angle lens opens up the space and gives us more in the frame, a telephoto lens is more zoomed in and can capture things from afar. But if we take a look at two photo examples, we can see that both wide-angle and telephoto lenses distort the image. As you can see in the wide-angle example, it looks extremely unnatural, and the telephoto lens sort of makes me look flattened out and almost a bit chubby, which I'm not. Now the wide-angle lens is of course an extreme example. It almost looks like a caricature, and I don't think that anyone would ever take a photo like that, but it's still important to know about this so you don't choose the wrong lens at the wrong time. Let's say shooting the wedding bride up close at 200mm, she'll probably smack your ass for making her look fat. That's when we get back to the normal or standard focal lengths. Somewhere between 50 and 70 is considered the most natural way to portray a subject without distorting the image. This becomes extra clear in this example where we photograph the same subject but at different focal lengths. Notice how the face gets distorted at different focal lengths, but also another thing. The background moves closer to our subject when we're at tighter focal lengths and further away when we shoot wide, even though we have the same framing in every photo. This is called compression and can actually be used to your advantage if you want to move, let's say, some mountains closer to your subject. The second thing that different focal lengths affect in our image is our depth of field, which we talked more about in the exposure episode. Again, a telephoto lens compresses the image, making the background appear as closer to our subject and actually makes it more blurry, while a wide-angle lens sort of pushes the background away from our subject and creates a deeper depth of field, or more in focus. Even though the distance from the subject to the background is the same in both examples, and we have the same aperture in both examples. So what different lenses are there? Well, you first have two main categories. You have prime lenses, which have a fixed focal length, and then you have zoom lenses, which can change focal length, basically moving the optical center closer or further away from the sensor. Zoom lenses are great and very versatile, but usually not as sharp or as fast as a prime lens. A fast lens is a lens with a low f number or aperture number, which are used in low light scenarios or when you want that really blurry background. A prime lens usually have a maximum aperture of around 1.4, while zoom lenses stop at 2.8 or maybe 4.0, which is a lot darker. Another thing to consider is that all lenses have a minimum focusing distance, meaning how close it can get to a subject before it can no longer focus on it. Usually around a foot or 30 centimeters, and of course depending on what lens you have. Wide-angle lenses have a closer minimum distance and telephoto has a longer one, unless you get a macro lens. This is a lens that lets you get real close up to something while being able to keep it in focus. The macro lenses are usually around 100mm, but of course there are exceptions here too, like the Laowa probe lens at 24mm. Now we're gonna look at what the different focal lengths are good for, and then I'm gonna give you some of my opinions on choosing the right lens for you. First we have the wide-angle lenses, and these are sort of divided into extreme wide-angle lenses like a fisheye lens and the sort of more normal wide-angle lenses. A fisheye lens or an extreme wide-angle is used when you want that distorted look that you get. They're usually at around 12mm, but they can go even lower than that. Then we have the regular or the normal wide-angle lenses at around 24 to 35. These are great when you want to show your surroundings, but you don't want that much distortion that you get in the extreme wide-angle lenses. Wide-angle lenses also create more of a connected feeling in your videos, because you can get so close to whatever's going on and still fill the frame. It makes the audience feel like they're sort of in the scene, for example in a fight scene, rather than watching it from afar that you would with a telephoto lens. Now if you want a more natural look, you can go for the normal or the standard lenses, which lies around 40 to 70mm. These are great run and gun everyday focal lengths that's not too wide and not too tight. Just know that when you move towards the 70 range, you might have some framing problems in locations that are not so spacious. Then we have the telephoto lenses that usually lie around 70 to 200 or even more, but usually 200 is the max that you will ever need for video. Like I said before, a telephoto lens lets us get close to our subject without us actually being close. This can of course be super helpful at an event like a wedding when you want to get up close but you physically can't. Just remember to not get too close at like 200mm, because that might make someone look a bit chubby. And wedding people don't want to look chubby. And then lastly, being able to create that compression, that blurry background, and oh, it just looks so good, and you can never create that with a wide-angle lens. So, if you're looking for recommendations, the best one I can give you is to get a really good lens to cover a little bit of all ranges. Like this one, for example. This is a Tamron 28-75 f2.8, and I got this back in 2019. So I've had this for about 3.5 years, and man, I still use it to this day. It's very sharp when compared to other more expensive brands. It's fairly fast at 2.8, which is good for a zoom lens. And lastly, it covers your sort of day-to-day ranges from that 28 wide to that 75 telephoto. Now, if you feel like spending a bit more, I would consider buying a prime lens at 1.4 for those low light situations. I have a 35mm from Sigma that's at 1.4, which I'm shooting on now. What I like about it is that it's very sharp, and even though it's at 35mm, which is considered sort of wide, I can still get this shallow depth of field from 6 feet or 2 meters. I can't really recommend a focal length for you because it completely depends on what you're shooting. However, what I can recommend is to not buy cheap lenses to cover all the ranges. This is really a matter of quality versus quantity. It's a lot better to get fewer lenses with high quality. Now I hope that you have a good understanding how different lenses work and how different focal lengths affect your image. As always, I hope you enjoyed the episode, and if you have any further questions, just drop them in the comments, ask away in the Facebook group, and I hope to see you in the next one.